Hi everyone, welcome to Reviewer Zero. Here I talk about academic business papers and share my honest take on them. His is the first video of this channel, so I will briefly introduce how this channel came into existence. Academic papers are the most important way research gets recorded. They capture how researchers think about a field, how they understand it, and what new ideas they contribute. In most universities around the world, papers are still the main way researchers are evaluated. Publishing more papers, especially high-quality ones, signals greater impact and stronger ability. And it often comes with more recognition, higher status in academia, and higher income. Many people have landed faculty positions at top universities because of their publications. They become experts in a field, sometimes even across multiple fields, and gain public visibility, consulting opportunities, and social influence. Some researchers even use their published work to inform public life, social development, and government policy. The main goal of this channel is to help people understand academic papers, something that often feels intimidating, inaccessible, and hard to follow if you're outside academia. Because of my own background, I'll mainly focus on papers from business schools for business research, or really, for academic research in general. The core goal is simple: to use scientific methods to answer an important question. In business research, those questions usually relate to management, companies, or markets. And because business school research talks a lot about firms and consumers, it's often easier for a general audience to relate to than, say, papers on rocket science or quantum mechanics. That makes it easier to build intuition and really understand what the paper is saying. For most papers, the ultimate, or at least the formal goal, is to be published in a top academic journal. Most journals use a peer review process. After a paper is submitted, the editor will first look at it and then assign it to a specific associate editor or area editor based on the topic and subfield. That area editor then puts together a small review team, usually 3 to 5 people. For example, the area editor might send the paper to 2 reviewers who they believe are familiar with both the research topic and the methods used. Those reviewers typically take anywhere from 1 to 3 months, though this varies a lot across journals, to read the paper and write detailed comments. They'll also recommend whether the paper should be rejected, accepted, or revised and resubmitted. Once the area editor receives the reviewer's reports, they combine those comments with their own assessment and write a summary recommendation for the editor-in-chief. In most cases, the editor follows the area editor's recommendation and sends the journal's decision back to the authors. This kind of editorial system may not be familiar to most people, but it's at the very core of academic publishing and even of scientific progress itself. Over the past century, this system has helped give rise to many famous scientists, landmark papers, and major scientific breakthroughs in most cases. It strikes a balance between the workload placed on reviewers and the reliability of scientific research, helping science move forward in a relatively stable way. In natural sciences especially, once a paper is published, many other research teams will try to replicate the results. So for authors, the goal isn't just to convince the 3 to 5 people on the editorial team. They also have to make sure their findings can stand up to scrutiny by thousands or even millions of people in the future. If the results can't be replicated, the consequences can be severe: reputations destroyed, jobs lost, investigations launched. Because of this, editors play a fairly modest role in the larger process of scientific progress. They may be able to decide whether a paper gets published in their journal, but they usually cannot decide whether it will survive long-term testing and the passage of time. That ultimate judgment comes from the scientific community as a whole and, in a broader sense, from real-world practice across society. And yet, even under these conditions, even in fields like the natural sciences where standards are supposed to be extremely strict, misconduct and fraud still occur at a significant scale. If you know anything about what goes on behind the scenes in some areas of biology and medicine, you know just how rampant this can be, and once you realize that, the so-called authorities you constantly see on TV, in newspapers, or online start to lose some of their mystique. And when we move from the natural sciences into business research and other social sciences, things start to get, honestly, a bit scary. Take business school research as an example. In principle, the main audience for business school papers should be companies' research that helps firms operate better and become more profitable. In some cases, the audience might also include government agencies, like regulators or consumer protection organizations, because they need to understand how businesses actually work in order to protect consumers and promote social welfare. But here's the reality: almost none of the corporate executives, industry leaders, and even relevant government officials I met have ever read a top business journal in their lives. This isn't because they don't care about how companies operate or about consumer welfare. Of course they care. Even from a purely self-interested perspective, their personal success is tightly linked to these issues. Just imagine this: would you ever expect the person in charge of rocket launches at the world's leading aerospace organization, say NASA, to have never read papers on dynamics or thermodynamics? That would be absurd. Yet that exact kind of absurd situation is extremely common in business and management research. The core reason is simple: the topics business school researchers study and the conclusions they reach are often completely irrelevant to actual companies. If these researchers truly had knowledge that could help firms increase profits by, say, 10%, do you really think executives wouldn't stay up all night studying their papers? Do you really think companies wouldn't pay these scholars millions of dollars a year to help run their businesses? What I'm pointing out here is a fundamental problem in business school research. It waves the flag of business, but is, in many situations, deeply disconnected from real business practice. A group of people who, for most of their lives, have never worked a single day in a company, who spend 99% of their time in classrooms and offices, are trying to tell us how companies should be run. Now, to be clear, that alone is not the real issue. Einstein never personally built an atomic bomb, but his theories were tested by countless peers, scientists, and engineers, by people who actually built those weapons. The difference is that in business schools, research is almost completely isolated from the real business world. These studies are never tested by companies, by society, or by the general public. They only need to satisfy the opinions of 2 or 3 so-called experts, people who themselves became experts by playing the same game. Because of this, a lot of very strange phenomena have emerged, things that would look bizarre in other discipline. First, business research has created many odd little academic cliques that really shouldn't exist. Within these closed circles, a specific group of people controls a significant share of publications in top journals. The so-called scientific methods they use would sound ridiculous if you explained them to researchers in other fields or even to an educated general audience. But that doesn't matter. As long as they're recognized within that small group, everything is fine. Imagine being a young researcher in a field where the most senior scholars all loudly insist that the Earth is flat. And the only way you can publish papers, get promoted, or land a faculty job is by first agreeing that the Earth is flat. Of course, you'll start shouting that the Earth is flat too. And once you become senior yourself, you'll use the Earth is flat as the standard to judge the next generation. Another phenomenon that's especially severe in business schools is the enormous power of reviewers, particularly editors, when there is no scrutiny from the broader public. A paper can get published as long as it roughly follows some existing research paradigm, whether that paradigm is right or wrong, good or bad, and happens to match the preferences of just a few reviewers. Do the math. After earning a PhD, a researcher may only need to satisfy fewer than 20 people. As long as they follow the right template, To secure tenure and become a so-called all-knowing authority in a field, given these rules, the importance of staying on good terms with reviewers, especially journal editors, becomes painfully obvious. After all, once these papers are published, they help secure faculty jobs, attract public attention, and generate enormous prestige only to then sit and read in journals forever. Their main function is to serve as templates for the next generation of young scholars who want to survive in the same game. You can imagine how much corruption a system like this can produce. In fact, while I was making this video, I came across a paper discussing conflicts of interest in top business journals, where editors simultaneously serve as authors. The paper finds that 2.4% of the authors account for nearly half of the published articles, and articles with conflicts of interest have roughly a quarter fewer citations. Once you understand how this system actually works, this kind of phenomenon isn't surprising at all. I do appreciate the author's time and effort in this paper. However, I guess no editor would accept this paper for publication, because business research lacks external accountability, and because editorial decisions aren't subject to broad oversight. Editors inevitably end up holding far more power than most people would ever consider reasonable. That's the main reason I want to spend time building this channel and why I chose to call it Reviewer Zero, to help more people, whether you're a business operator, a policymaker, or just an ordinary consumer, better understand and evaluate business research. The goal is to put business research back where it belongs and to help it return to a healthier path. All right, now that I've said all that, let me talk a bit about my plans and some practical details. To be honest, I don't really have a concrete plan, but I still decided to make this first video and launch the channel because I know myself. If I waited until everything was perfectly thought through before taking action, this channel would have a 99.99% chance of never existing. So the exact direction of the channel may change as I keep making videos and as my thinking evolves. That said, I do have a rough idea. This channel will mainly be a place where I share content that I personally think is worth sharing. I'll regularly read papers from top business journals. Like any other field, business schools have their own lists that define what counts as a good or top journal. One of the most commonly used lists in business schools is called the UTD-24, which was originally proposed by the dean at UT Dallas. It includes 24 journals. By the way, the two journals studied in the paper I mentioned earlier are very likely on that list, of course. You can imagine that deciding which journals count as top journals is itself a huge source of power and also a place where things can be manipulated, given limited time. I'll mainly focus on sharing interesting and important research from these 24 journals, and I'll evaluate them from the perspective of a manager, a policymaker, or an ordinary consumer. Going forward, depending on my time and on feedback from you, I may also consider bringing in research from other fields, like economics. But for now, I'll take it one step at a time, given what most viewers are comfortable with. I've decided that the main focus of this channel will be research that the general audience can easily relate to, such as some research about general consumers. The reason is simple. Not everyone watching this channel is a business executive or works at a consumer protection agency. But every single one of us is a consumer. Consumption takes up a huge part of our time, our money, and our attention. So when it comes to research about consumers, all of us are actually in a position to form our own judgments. And one more thing. I've been thinking about starting this channel for a long time. But what finally pushed me to make the decision to give up time I could have spent playing with my kids, hanging out with friends, or traveling, and instead sit in front of a computer making content that maybe no one will watch or care about was what I've seen recently. Some new data reports on consumer behavior and several recent academic papers on consumers were the final trigger that made me say, okay, It's time to do this. Here's a set of statistics on replication in consumer research. Take the first two journals on this chart, JCR and JMR. These are the absolute top journals in marketing and consumer research. They're supposed to represent the highest standard of consumer research in the entire business discipline, and here's the awkward part. Research that outsiders see as the highest level, research that turns people into authorities in consumer research and earns them well-paid tenured jobs, has a replication rate of a little bit more than 5%, 2 out of 37, and that 5% is a strangely symbolic number. Because in many experiments, what you need is a p-value below 5%. You can roughly think of that as a statistical threshold, and meeting that threshold is often a basic requirement for getting a paper published. In other words, when you read these supposedly top-tier findings in consumer research with great respect and admiration, you should probably be mentally prepared for this. After reading 20 papers, if you're lucky, there might be one whose findings you can reasonably expect to see again in the real world for the other 19 papers. I'm not saying the authors must have committed fraud or misconduct or that their findings are outright wrong, but their research is definitely worth further scrutiny, and based on results that are, at the very least, not very robust, they can get faculty jobs, secure tenure, get promoted, earn higher salaries, become authorities in a field, judge other people's work, and even influence policy decisions. I think that's a very serious problem from a methods perspective. Business school research roughly falls into three categories. The first type uses primary data collected by the researchers themselves. The most common example is lab experiments conducted at universities, usually with college students as participants. For instance, researchers might show students different reading materials and observe how their responses differ. The second type uses secondary data from the business world. These studies typically involve partnerships with specific companies and rely on statistical models to draw conclusions under a set of assumptions. Even from this brief description, you can probably sense the trade-off. Compared to lab experiments, this kind of evidence comes directly from real businesses, so it's usually more relevant. But because researchers don't control how the data are generated, the strength of causal evidence can be weaker. The third category is what people inside the field call theoretical research. These researchers don't use any data at all. Their arguments are built entirely on assumptions about human behavior. Whether those assumptions are actually true or even reasonable is often not that important. As long as previous papers have assumed that people behave this way, or as long as editors are willing to accept it, the assumptions are considered fair game. Based on those assumptions, researchers then use mathematical derivations to produce conclusions. Whether those conclusions help real businesses make better decisions is not their concern and not the stated goal of this kind of research. What really matters is whether, after a series of untested assumptions and mathematical steps, they can arrive at results that seem surprising, or what they like to call counterintuitive. This research paradigm originally comes from economics more than 100 years ago, when data were extremely scarce and economists had little choice but to use mathematical models to describe how they believed the economy worked. The problem is that this paradigm has been imported into business research by people who have never worked in a company and whose main skill is mathematical derivation. They start with very simple assumptions about human behavior and then derive how businesses work or how policies might affect markets. Whether those conclusions actually have anything to do with the real world or can meaningfully guide business decisions is simply not a question they or often even the reviewers care about. Personally, I believe the fact that this kind of research paradigm can still exist in the 21st century is the result of systemic corruption in the system. In future videos, I'll go into much more detail about these methods as we break down specific papers. Another reason I finally decided to start this channel is a few consumer research papers I've read recently. One of them looks at how people perceive fast fashion consumers. The authors ran a total of 7 studies to argue that people tend to see someone who wears fast fashion brands like Zara as having low self-control. Their logic goes like this. People supposedly believe that fast fashion consumers focus on the short term. And that belief comes from fast fashion's so-called quick response strategy, producing small batches, reacting quickly to market demand. According to the authors, this leads to 3 defining features of fast fashion. First, high trendiness. Second, high disposability. And third, unsustainable practices. These features, they argue, make others see fast fashion wearers as short-term oriented. And since people with low self-control are also seen as short-term focused, wearing fast fashion supposedly makes others think you lack self-control. Based on their findings, the authors offer some takeaways for readers. 1. If you're interviewing for a job that supposedly requires discipline, don't tell the interviewer you like Zara. Okay. Thanks. But honestly, when I'm interviewing to be a McDonald's manager, I don't think I'm going to have time to squeeze in. By the way, Zara is my favorite brand. Second, if you're trying to sell something to people who care about self-control, don't hire fast fashion influencers to promote it. And putting the implication aside, study 5, the one they use to support this, just feels really odd. They basically make some Chinese participants pick between 2 Greek yogurt brands, and then suddenly those people are labeled as seeking self-control products? That logic feels off. Third, if you're buying a gift for someone who values self-control, don't buy them Zara. And honestly, the main idea of this whole paper is just weird to me. It doesn't match what I see people doing in real life at all. First of all, how many people, especially when it comes to strangers, even pay attention to the clothing brands other people are wearing? And among the small group of people who are sensitive to clothing brands, sure, some might infer taste, wealth, or maybe hygiene. But how many people are out there inferring self-control from someone else's clothing brand? What is the actual benefit of judging someone else's level of self-control? Why would an ordinary person even care about others' self-control? Then there's the theory itself. The authors rely heavily on fast fashion's 3 characteristics, especially unsustainable practices, but for the average consumer, who knows almost nothing about the production side of the apparel industry. How many people actually associate fast fashion brands with these labels the moment they see them? My guess is very few. Maybe a small group of environmental activists who closely follow factory-level sustainability issues. But for most people, probably not. I'm not saying this chain of logic is completely impossible, but it can only apply to a very small subset of people. If this were a fictional character in a novel who behaved this way, I'd have no problem with it, but to claim this effect applies broadly to the general population, that feels like a stretch. In Study 1, the authors use responses from generative AI models to show that the more a brand is perceived as a fast fashion brand, the more its consumers are perceived as lacking self-control. This inspired me, and I decided to do a very simple test myself using generative AI. I asked it the exact behavior this paper is trying to prove. Suppose you are a consumer. Would wearing Zara clothing lead you to perceive another consumer as having lower self-control? What you see here are responses I got from different AI systems across multiple independent runs. And not only does my intuition disagree with the paper's, generative AI consistently gave answers that were the opposite of what the authors found. I'd actually encourage you to try this yourself. In the future, I will share more papers like this one. Alright, back to the content of this channel. To review all these papers, I need a consistent set of evaluation criteria. Given that these are business papers and given my limited time and my goal of helping non-specialists understand business research, I've decided to evaluate each paper using 4 subjective criteria. First, importance for business, the question it asks and its implications. If a piece of business research has no real relevance for business, I don't think it belongs in a business journal at all. This criterion is worth 4 points. Second, replicability. Do I believe the effect, and do I think the main thesis of the research can be replicated in general? In practice, reviewers in business journals often overlook this criterion or simply can't evaluate it. Once authors present 10 different studies all supporting the same finding, even if a reviewer has doubts, there isn't much they can do. This criterion is also worth 4 points. Third, how insightful the findings are. Is there anything genuinely new? Something previously unknown, or something people used to believe but turns out to be wrong? This is an important standard. If your findings are things everyone already knows without doing research, then the value of the research itself is pretty limited. That said, I personally think this matters a bit less than the first two criteria, so I give it 2 points. Fourth, methodological rigor. This is one of the most important aspects of any scientific paper, but given my time constraints and the purpose of this channel, I won't treat this as a core scoring criterion for now. I hope that, over time, more experts will help me refine and improve this part. That's it for this video. Please let me know your thoughts and suggestions in the comment section. Your feedback is greatly appreciated and it will help shape where this channel goes next. I'll read every comment. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next episode.